If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you.
Hello Internet, I'm excited. We have a first South African Air Force fellow here with us. I've even tried to wear blue, but I think this came out a bit dark with the camera, but this is actually blue, and I did that for the blue jobs. So, Jacques du Toit, former captain, SAAF, electronic warfare specialist, welcome here with us. Thank you. I want to tell to the people here, the man's in New Zealand. It's 10 o'clock at night there. He stayed up just for us. Man, you're a star. Where do you come from, Jacques? What happened to you? How did you end up in the Air Force? We want to know everything.
Hi, thank you, Chris. So I was in the Air Force for 11 years in total, and I left there at the end of 1999 as a captain. And my career was something very different, and I think you may find this very interesting how my career progressed. But in that time, the Air Force, most of that time I spent with the Joint Air Reconnaissance Intelligence Center at Air Force Base Waterkloof. I also flew as electronic warfare operator at 44 Squadron, 60 Squadron, and I also did some test flying on our mobile helicopter jammers with some of the helicopter squadrons around the country. So my story is basically in 4 parts, and the first bit is growing up as a PF child. You know, my dad was in 3 SAAF infantry most of his life, and where his career went, you know, we went with him. So that's the third part. The second part is all about me and my 3-year national service in the Air Force. And then the third part was me joining the Air Force in permanent force in 1990. And the first 5 years of that was I specialized in electronic warfare, signal intelligence. And in 95, I made a career change in the Air Force to imagery intelligence. You know, looking at aerial photographs and satellite photographs and things like that, and interpreting what is going on there for intelligence purposes. And that is basically the 4 parts of my story. But towards the end of my career, I also worked on a major part of South Africa's strategic space program at the time. A lot of people don't know about that, but we did have a program, and my project that I delivered to the Air Force in the last 3.5 years of my career was directly linked to that program. And I think some of your listeners would find that very interesting if they haven't heard that story before. But before I continue, I would just like to say, Chris, thank you very much for what you are doing with this channel. I think I'm saying exactly what some of your other contributors have said. And you know, and I was thinking about it the other day, and I thought that what you're actually doing is that you are protecting the past from its own future. Because the history is determined by those who write it, and if no one writes it, it's going to disappear. And you know, there's a great story to be told, and there's so many stories out there that people should stand up and say, "Oh, I want to tell my story as well." Otherwise, it's going to get lost. And so thank you very much for what you're doing with the channel. So to jump right into it, I was born in 1969 in Potchefstroom in the Kalida Hospital. My dad at that stage was instructor at 3 SAAF in Potchefstroom. He started his career with 3 SAAF. At age 16, he ran away from home and joined the army, and he started with 3 SAAF in Lens. And they later moved to Potchefstroom, where he met my mum. She was a teller at Volkskas Bank at Potchefstroom. And in 1969, I was born. Later, 15 months later, in 1970, had a brother, Peter. He also later joined the Air Force, and he was radio radar technical line with in 2 of the squadrons in Bloemspruit and at Air Force Base Waterkloof. So growing up in Portugal, my dad was NCO at the time. I think he got up to warrant officer class 2 at Freesci. He really loved a few things there. He loved being an instructor at Freesci. He loved the 81mm mortars. He loved Unimorgs. So we grew up in that base on Porch. Our house was right in line with the airfield there in Porch. I think 42 Squadron was there with the Cessnas, Bosboks, and Pudus. And they would fly over our house all the time whenever they were flying. I think they were there because of 14 Field Artillery was at Porch, and they did the forward air controlling from the Bosboks. So that's why the squadron was there. But all our neighbors, all our friends that we used to play with around us, their dads were also either at 14 Field Artillery or at Freesci. So all of, we were all, in the same situation there. And our dads were almost never at home. They were always on deployment on the border or somewhere. And I remember specifically during Savannah, thinking back now, that time in 75, most of my friends around me, their dads were in Angola, in Savannah with the artillery, fighting the war there. And there were a few times when in the afternoons, my mama would say, there's a funeral procession outside, and we would stand in the garden and look in the main road. We lived in General Coors Della Rey line number 7. We were right at the entrance of the base. So you would see these funeral processions come past, and the 14 Field Artillery had a Bedford truck with that pulled a 25-pound gun behind it. And on top of the gun, they had a frame where the coffin would be engraved in the South African flag. And this would be a regular occurrence during 75. Wherever, when things happened, there would be a funeral, and these processions would come past our house. And, all the other boys we played with in the neighborhood, whenever you played, we played games like Brug 14, and we had no idea what the hell it was, but it was a great game to play. Anyway, so, and I remember one of our neighbors that lived next to us, his dad was a sergeant major at 14 Field Artillery, and he had small little cannons, and we used to play with these cannons there in the garden, as boys do. And at the back of the fence, we had some English neighbors, and the one night they said, we need to jump over the fence and come watch. They're going to show a slideshow against the garage wall there. And what it was basically this. Their dad went to France to go and receive some of the Elan Panzer vehicles, from the Powered factory in France. And he had taken a lot of slides, and they were showing the slideshow there next to the house on the garage wall, and so we were exposed to this place called France. Where is this? Our world was very small. But anyway, so whenever my dad came back from a border trip I think the Freesci was mostly deployed on the cup lane to patrol between the Balkans. The beacons at number, these were that delineated the border between South Africa and Angola, and Freesci would deploy there, and then they would get a section of these beacons to patrol, and he would then oversee that. He was also later the comms officer for Freesci, so he would go up there and provide the communications back to base for Freesci. And whenever he came back home, he would bring us these interesting things from the border. He would bring us little Bushman drums or bows and arrows, or he once bought my mum a coffee table that was carved by Bushman out of teak. It was an amazing little table, and he bought it from a Bushman just before you got onto the Flossie to come back to South Africa, and he had to break the 4 legs off and tie it up in an old army blanket. That was his carry-on language on the Flossie on the way back. And later he assembled this and glued it back together. And this was growing up all the years. This was the coffee table in our house, this with all the Bushman carvings on it. But my brother was a bit younger than I was at that time, and often when my dad came back, he wouldn't recognize my dad. He wouldn't know who this guy was, and just walked into the house. You know, and that was part of the story and the, you know, just the reality of growing up in that. But towards the end of the 70s, a lot of the NCOs at Freeside got opportunity to do the officer selection course. And then my dad did the officers course. I can't remember if they did it at Freeside or they went to Oudtshoorn for that. But when he came back, he was no longer now sergeant major, and he was now a captain. And that meant we had to move, you know, a couple of kilometers down the road to the officers' houses. So, you know, that was one of many moves to come in my life. And there was this standing joke going around that, you know, you identify a permanent force guy, you know, he's got dumb children and he's got scratch furniture because he changed schools so often, moving around, you know, to follow your dad's career. And there's a bit of a truth with that, I think, growing up. But anyway, so at the end of 78, my dad was posted to Kimberly, to one maintenance unit, as an infantryman, as a captain there. And he basically was given the task to train up the junior leaders for one maintenance unit in Kimberly for a year. That was the deal. So we moved down to Kimberly. And our house was very close to the Jack Linden officers' mess in Kimberly. So we stayed there only for a year while this training was going on. And what I remember is that my dad would often take us with him to Magersfontein when he took his course there, and he would give them a presentation on the what happened at Magersfontein and what it means for them as soldiers, and the lessons learned, you know, of Magersfontein. So in that year, I think we went there 4 times with him, and we got the story from him quite a few times there. But I think one of your previous speakers, Roland de Vries, spoke about that. And all I want to add to what he said is that when you sit there, they at Magersfontein, they on top of the hill, they got like an amphitheater built in concrete. And if you look to the south over the battlefield itself, you realize that in that 10 square kilometers, there were hundreds of guys who died 80 years ago in this battle. And you could see the foxholes where the Boers were dug in at the bottom. But if you walk around on the hill itself, it's very notable that almost none of the rocks there are still intact. All of it is cracked, as the British were firing on top of the hill instead of where the Boers were. They didn't know the Boers were lying for them, waiting in the bottom. And also something very interesting about that battle is that one of the hangovers of the Napoleonic Wars is that the British in that battle still wore the red jackets with the shiny buttons, and everything was shiny, and the white cliff helmets. So whenever they moved, they were easy targets. You know, you could immediately see them, and that's why they were just annihilated there. And after that, I think the major thing that changed for the British forces is that they went to a khaki uniform, and they got away. They removed all the shiny buttons, and even the water canteens were shiny. So whenever they took a drink or tried to drink water in that hot climate, while lying there in the trenches, the Boers would see that, and then that would be the end of the water canteen. You know, so that was really interesting growing up in Kimberley. But that was only for a year, and really soon, in end of '79. Both my parents were in the Defence Force at that stage, and my dad got a posting to Messina, to Madimbu. So he was tasked with, as the officer commanding of 112 Battalion at Madimbu. Now, Madimbu, just to orientate you, is between Messina and the Kruger National Park. It's about 2/3 towards the Kruger National Park, right on the Limpopo River. And 112 Battalion was a vendor battalion, and he was tasked to train up the vendor soldiers to become the first corps of the vendor army. And so we were there from 80, 81, 82 for the 3 years while he was training up these guys to now become the vendor army. And we just loved going with him to Madimbu. We had a big Land Rover, and the deal was that he would sleep at Madimbu 3 nights a week and 4 nights then in Messina. So he drove around with his Land Rover between Madimbu and Messina all the time. And he had with him his R1 rifle and a bag with 10 magazines, ammo pouch with 10 magazines, always with him in the Land Rover. And my brother and I used to fight each other on who's going to carry the R1 next. We just loved the R1. We grew up with Messina with the R1. So while he was at Madimbu, Madimbu was an incredible place. It was very harsh. It was a very hot climate. And it was in like a dome area there next to the Limpopo River. And I remember one Saturday, they had a special sports day for the vendor troops there. And they started the day off the morning with a marathon, where these guys were running a proper full marathon. And they were awesome runners. And then from about 10 o'clock onwards, they started playing soccer in various teams, and that would carry on until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And that day was on record, me personally, the hottest day ever in my life. And they had in the ops room at Madimbu, they had this thermometer system, a wet ball and a dry ball, that they had to maintain their record of for training purposes. But in the shade that day, it was 48 degrees Celsius. In the sun, it was 52. And it was so hot, you couldn't drink water or, any fluids fast enough to maintain your body fluids properly. But it was incredibly hot. But in that time, my dad also had a lot of foreign visitors. So, often touring groups would come through there. And I remember specifically the ones, there were 2 sets of visitors. The one was 2 Taiwanese colonels. I remember they had like a olive green, like a field dress, like a Browns. There's this olive green, and they came past, and they even gave my mother some gifts, big red Chinese satin pillow covers. I think that may still be it. There was also some Israeli generals that came past a couple of times. So the Israelis would often come past there, and they would show them what a border base like Madimbu would look like, and what they were doing there, and how they were conducting their training. But the Defence Forces Entertainment Unit also used to often send entertainers there to entertain the troops. And the same people that would go to the border would also then come past the other bases like Madimbu within country. And I remember specifically there was a few people like, there was a country star, a guy called Matt Herter. Now, Matt Herter is like a 6'4" tall guy with handlebar moustache and glasses. And he even had a song that is still on Spotify, the Drive Safe, or Ray favorite song, that he wrote at that time to encourage people to give lifts to national servicemen. So he came past there. So he did a concert at Madimbu for the vendor troops, and he would come to town and do one for the town people as well. And the same was, there was another lady in South Africa, that stage, artist by the name of Maritza, and she did a tour there. I also remember my dad had a very incriminating picture of her sitting on his lap, one of these tours. And also South African artist, the guy by the name of Sias Reinecker, in his band, they came through. And he had a very popular South African song called Spruikies, or Freckles, in English. And it's a song about a small girl that didn't think she was so special and so on. And he was singing the song to tell her how special she was. And at the end of the song, he actually realized that this little girl is blind. And, it's a beautiful song. But when they did this concert at Madimbu for the vendor troops, it was on a Saturday night. It was very dark. And just before the band got onto stage, I remember the vendor troops started singing in Venda, the most amazing male voices you've heard in your life. And you know, so C.S. Renica and his troop was so impressed by this. They just you know, wouldn't let these guys stop singing. They just wanted more and more of these guys singing. They were so awesome. But anyway, when he sang, when they sang their songs, and the only girl there was my my 6-year-old sister Natasha, and he called her forward to the stage, and he sat in front of the stage with him there, and he sang this song for her. You know, and that was very special. So, but I remember Messina for all these interesting things and tour groups that came through there that just made things just a bit more interesting. But there were two very interesting events that happened in that time that we lived in Messina that I wanted to share with you. And the one was quite an interesting one. As boys of that time do, you join the Floor Trackers, or the Afrikaans version of the Boy Scouts. And you know, you have all sorts of interesting, you learn all sorts of interesting things, like how to make a fire and how to do knots, and you know, all these wonderful things, and like introduction to survival type training and stuff. And you know, the one thing that we had a little green book with all these lessons in. I would read all of it and try and learn as much as I can from this book. But on the 16th of August 1982, it was my mum's birthday. We were at home that night, and you know, celebrating my mum's birthday. And at some stage, I went outside and I heard this. There was an aircraft overhead, and but it was very strange because we hardly ever had aircraft at night in Messina. It was just too remote. There was no, you know, reason for aircraft to be there. And but this aircraft sounded very, very different. Now, having grown up in Porch with the Bosboks and the Kudus and the Cessnas there, it didn't sound like anything like that at all. And it was quite strange hearing this new noise and seeing this plane fly. So, but this guy was flying over the town all the time. He was doing figure eights, and it was almost like he was lost. And I remember this handbook that we had, there was a procedure for helping a lost pilot find the closest airfield, and you had to use a torch for that. So I ran inside to my room and I got my torch out, and when this guy came close to our house again, I did the first part of it where you flash dots and dashes at him to get his attention, and then when he came over me again, you slowly direct him to the direction of where the closest airfield is. Now, the Messina airfield was southwest of the town itself, a couple of kilometers out of town, and it was an unmanned airfield, so there was no lights, nobody there. It was just a strip in the middle of the night. So the second time I did this procedure, this guy disappeared in that direction. And you know, we never heard anything again that night. And you know, I went inside and I told my parents about this incident with the plane, and they said, "Oh no, it's probably just somebody, you know, who was on a joyride over the town or whatever." And we left it there. So the next evening, my dad comes home because they had the group officer commanding meeting that day. He came home and he said, "You know, he went out to the airfield this morning because they found that last night that plane that came over their house was a Zimbabwean plane. A guy defected from the Thornhill Air Base in a Cessna 02 Skymaster. I think they called him a Lynx V37 in Zimbabwe at the time. And there was a guy, his name was Mark Jeffries. He wasn't a pilot, he just taught himself to fly at one of the flying schools there in Zimbabwe, and he borrowed this plane, and he defected to South Africa, and I think the plane was later returned to the Thornhill Air Base where they flew from by truck. They didn't fly back. For some reason, they took it back by truck. So inadvertently, and without knowing it, you know, I could never independently confirm that I helped him to get to the airfield, because it was the first ever landing he did, you know, out of all things. But he got it right, and you know, the plane was safe, and he was safe, and I think he later ended up in Cape Town. But that was just something interesting that happened there. Another one was late 1982, one Saturday night, we just went to bed, and the phone rang. Sorry. So the phone rang, and I heard my dad pick up, and and soon afterwards, about 10 minutes later, I heard a Land Rover stop right in front of our house, and I got up to have a look, and I saw there were two guys coming down towards the gate, and my dad called them to the bedroom window, and he spoke to them briefly there, and I couldn't hear what he was saying to them. And then he asked my mum to go to the kitchen and get all the extra black rubbish bag that she had. And that was quite strange. As he came back and he passed the 2 rolls of black plastic bags through the window, and these guys were off. And we never heard another word about this. And only years later, I remember this incident, and I asked my dad, so what happened that night? Why were these guys, 12 o'clock at night knocking at, the window to talk to you? And he said, no, it's these guys were helping some organization to be established, in Zimbabwe, and they needed the plastic bags to hide the arms cache and some ammunition, so it doesn't get wet. So they were later that night going to cross over to Limpopo. Limpopo was very low at that time of year. And they would bury this cache and then tell the guys where to go get the arms and ammunition there. So it was a strange world to grow in. In Messina, every now and then you would see the ex-Rhodesians come through, and when they went for visits and came back, they came into the shops and they bought out all the chocolates, because there were no chocolates in Zimbabwe at that time. But over time, the traffic was one way. It was a one-way overbite bridge. It was into South Africa, not back again. And what I realized later is that we were actually seeing history being made by people leaving Rhodesia, and when it became Zimbabwe, and the rest is history. We know all of that. So, that was me growing up in primary school in Messina. So, I don't know, do you have any questions at this stage, Chris? Just carry on.
Man, I must tell you, this is fascinating. I'm sitting here and thinking to myself, wow, this is the first guy who's actually younger than me. Would you believe it? He doesn't look like that, but and yet here you are and you tell these stories. No, it's fascinating, so we're really, really impressed. If there's somebody here who knows about that aircraft that defected, please come and tell us, because I'm fascinated now. I want to know if this guy actually assisted you or not, and if he did, you have to buy him a beer. At the very least.
It would be great. I only later realized, and you make the connection that it could only have been this guy, because there's never planes at night. So it was quite interesting, and it would be interesting to hear if this guy is still alive, if he actually did react on that the torch signals that night, or it was just random that he was flying over our house in the figure 8 all the time. So that was still a mystery to be confirmed.
But I have to say this, what you're doing here is history, so thanks for that. I mean, look about it. I mean, never in the books are you ever going to read what you just heard here. And that's what I love about this channel. We are putting the history down. Perhaps someday someone clever, smarter than me, will come here, listen to the guys, and perhaps, write a few books or things like that. So just carry on. We're really listening, not interrupting you again.
No worry. Anytime, please ask questions. So, end of 92, 82, my parents got transferred again, this time to Pretoria. And, you change schooling systems. You go from Potchefstroom to Kimberly, and Kimberly to Messina, and then Messina to Pretoria. And you realize how the different educational systems differ in the provinces at that stage. And then sometimes it was easy and sometimes it was really hard. But, in 83, both my parents ended up with at a unit in what is now today called Centurion, the unit was called Colette, the College for Educational Training. And that is the unit where they developed a lot of the training material for the Defence Force. And my dad later moved on to Quartermaster General. He had a role to organize and help with the security of all the national ammo dumps around the country. There were these 4 or 5 strategic ammunition depots around the country, and he would be there to help make sure the security was the best it could be, and you know, from his inventory experience. So that's why we ended up in Pretoria at that stage. And I basically started my high school then at that time in Pretoria. So, you know, like most other boys, you start to play rugby, and you know, I remember in the evenings. This is now the middle to late 80s. You get home and sit outside in the garden, and you know, I used to see the C-130s and C-160s. We were very close to the Waterkloof Air Force Base, and you would see 6, 8 at a time come in and to land, you know, at a time, and every single night there was almost no night where they were not flying. And I realized later that a lot of the things that were happening up on the border were severely censored for the rest of us. So we knew there was a border war, make no mistake, but a lot of the detail was just missing from this picture. But anyway, you know, even though I was in a military house, you know, and all our neighbors where we lived, you know, were in the military, you never really had an idea what was really going on in the border. There was a lot of that. It was censored from national television and news at that time. But I remember specifically in 1986, the one afternoon, I did not feel well. I went to rugby practice and I came back, and I was not feeling well, and you know, a very heavy flu at that stage. And my mum asked my dad to take me at about 6 o'clock in the evening, take me to one military hospital just to be checked out and make sure that I was fine, because there's, you know, they were just looking quite serious at that stage. So my dad took me, and we drove to one military hospital and parked outside, and we walked down. And as we came into the emergency ward at the bottom, where we would go normally for things like flu and so on, as the doors opened, I saw this sight which I'd never forget. You know, the whole floor of that emergency ward was covered in blood. And there were about 6 or 7 gurneys on the side with field dressings and battlefield dressings and normal white dressings and empty drip bags. And there was even a handprint next on the wall, a bloody handprint. And I looked at my dad, what was going on here? And one of the orderlies came out and he said, no, they just had a casevac from the border. And there were about 16 guys immediately there that needed help. So can we wait? And I said to my dad, we can definitely wait. And we just left. So I said, we can definitely wait. So we rather left. And I said to my dad on the way back, what is going on? You know, and he said, yes, you know, there's a border war going on. And, you know, a lot of these things are being not that widely communicated. And it's quite a reality check to know that there are 16 guys there. They're all blown up and shot up that would not make the news that night. But anyway, they were now in good hands at one military hospital. And that was a frequent occurrence. And a lot of those C-130s and C-160s coming back from the border would often have these casevacs coming into one military hospital. And that was quite interesting to have that type of experience at that age. But as you go on, you know, you have to do conscription. And initially, I received my call-up, the first call-up letter notifying me that I now had a force number, and that I soon have to be ready to do my national service. And the first call-up, if I remember correctly, was to the signals unit in Heidelberg, Army Signals. But that's, you know, my mum said, you know, being an administrator in the Defence Force, she said, you know, those things change all the time. Don't even think about it. When you get your next letter, you'll have a better idea where they want you to go. So the next letter, a year later, was indicating that I would be sent to Dani Tron Army Intelligence School. And that sounded a bit better to me. Still didn't realize, you know, what it was all about. But closer to finishing school, I made a decision. I said, you know, I quite like the idea of rather going to the Air Force and do my national service in the Air Force. So I asked my mum to see if she can, you know, organize it so that I get moved onto the Air Force list and rather go do my 2 years national service in the Air Force. So I finally got a call up for the Air Force, and in February 1988, I arrived at the Air Force Gymnasium in Valhalla. It was just a couple of kilometers down the road from where we lived in Pretoria. Now, in that intake, we were the last of the intake that was going to be the 2-year full national service. After that, it went to 18 months, and they even cleared out before us, and then it went up to 1 year, and they even cleared out before us. So we were really the last of the last after that 2 years. But at the Air Force Gymnasium in February '88, there were 2,700 men, you know, arriving for national service. And you know, we were put into 9 different squadrons. There were 6 squadrons at the Air Force Gymnasium itself, but because of the numbers, 3 of the squadrons, Squadron 7, 8, and 9, were in another camp to the south of Swartkops Air Force Base. They had like a temporary camp there, and these guys had tents there. We all used the same mess at Valhalla, but you know, you had 2,700 guys eating in one mess, standing in a row. So every meal you change squadrons. Who was first in line to have a meal, and it's 3 times a day. You can just imagine the logistics around all of that. But you know, and if you ask a lot of the guys at the time, they would say that they found that it was really hard and tough, but they were better coming out of it. Everyone changed in the 3 months that you did basics in the Air Force. And because it was Air Force, it was not easy at all. It was quite tough. We had guys who have done other arms of the defense force bases before, and then had to come back and do the Air Force one, and they said it was on par with any of the other ones from just from a physical toughness point of view. So we even had at the time that we were doing our basics at the Air Force Gymnasium, there was a rumor going around that under training 3 guys have already died. But later I had a look, and it was only one. There was only one guy had a latent heart defect, so that they didn't pick up in the medicals, and he unfortunately passed away under training. But it was definitely not easy. But you know, you could see yourself and everyone else around you change in that time and become a different person, you know, while you were doing the basics. So after basics, we every person, every airman now had to go do their specialism training, and about 450 of us were allocated to Air Force security, and we were put on buses, and we were sent to the Air Force regiment next to the Hoedspruit Air Force Base. So we arrived there in May '88, and immediately, you know, as we arrived there, they said to us, okay, you've got a choice to make. We need 6 flights to be dog handlers and 9 flights to be normal security. And one of my friends there that did basics with me, he said he heard a rumor somewhere that if you volunteer to be a dog handler, you get a special allowance for that. You know, so let's go to doggies, you know. And there was no other information at the time, so we said, yes, let's go to doggies. But he had his information wrong. It was no allowance. It was all the same. So we ended up being in the 6 flights of 30 guys each that was going to do the dog handlers course. Now, what we didn't know at the time is that if you were a dog handler, you were going to be sent to the Air Force bases within the country. But they didn't tell us that at the time. They only told us that at the end of our training. And the guys who were security, just not dog handlers, we were after their training to be sent to all the Air Force bases on the border, like Rondangwa and Grootfontein and the likes. Anyway, that we only found out later. So it wasn't really an opportunity where you could make a choice whether you were going to the border or not. It was almost decided for you at that time. Anyway, so at the Air Force Regiment, it's a beautiful place in the Bushveld, awesome training facility. I remember that compared to the 3 months basics, the food was awesome. We got way more food and better quality food there. And towards the end of the training, we even were allowed to drink a beer or two at night. So it was, a much better experience than basics there. But it was really tough going. And Hoedspruit was a very different place to Pretoria. But anyway, it was great fun. So our dog handlers course consisted of 3 parts. We had 2 weeks security training. That's how to be a guard and how to do security properly. We had 2 weeks of weapons training. We had to learn all the South African infantry weapons that we may come across at any of these bases so that we could use them. And we also had a trunk of Russian weapons, so we could identify them if we come across them in our security role. So we had a couple of AKs and Tokarevs and Makarovs, and there was about 12 other different weapons that we had to know and be able to identify and operate at that time. And then after that, we had 2 weeks of dog handlers course, and that was delivered on Hoedspruit Air Force Base itself. And the Army dog handlers from Bergsluk would come through with their dogs, and they set up extra kennels there on the base, and they would bring these extra dogs, about 60 dogs at a time. And then we would do our dog handlers training there with them every morning on the base. So that was fascinating. The first time getting exposed to proper dog training for security purposes, and we had great fun with the dogs. But there were 2 very interesting events that took place during our training that I would like to share with you. Just when we arrived, the first week when we arrived, there was all the barracks were numbered from Alpha to Oscar, and they were in a half moon. So you had Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, all the way down to Mike, November, Oscar, right at the end. And I was an Oscar, and Oscar and November, every 2 of these bungalows were grouped together for a phase of the training. And the first week that we arrived there was a guy with me, an Oscar, E.L. Grobler was his name. Day 2 or 3 after arriving at Hoedspruit, we were all there all together, and we were there standing at attention. The corporal called us to attention there, and he shouted out, "Grobler, yeah, Grobler." Said, "Ja, corporal," and Eel put up his hand. He said, "Step out and come to me." And Eel stepped out, and he went to him. And you could see behind the corporal there that the officer commanding of the Air Force Regiment was walking towards us. And he was about 40 meters away, and he stopped. And the corporal then, this Corporal Jabert, he was our instructor for that dog handlers course. He said to El, the major would like to see you. So El went up to the major, Holt saluted him, and he had a private discussion there with the major, and after about 30 seconds, he saluted the major, and the major left again, and he came back. Then he immediately ran back into the bungalow, and this was now this big mystery, what was going on. And after a while, when we joined him in the bungalow, he told us that he was just informed that his dad had passed away, and he needed to gather all his stuff, and he had to get to Pretoria immediately. So he was off, and they were arranging transport for him, and the rest of us were soon off to lectures again. And it wasn't 10 minutes, and here comes EAL running back to join us for lectures. And he asked the corporal for permission to join us, and everyone looks at him, and he said, "Oh, no, it wasn't my dad who died. Apparently there's another EAL corporal and another, there was with us in basics, and his dad passed away. So it's not, luckily it was his dad and not my dad had died." So it was just one of those things that what's the chances of having two guys with the same initials and same surname, and you've got a 50-50 chance to get it right, you know. So luckily it wasn't his dad that died. So he was back, and we continued with the training. But we were Oscar in November together for the dog handlers training, and there was this guy in November, tall guy, quite thin at that stage, and his nose was always red from the sun. And that guy was, I'm sure you would know him. His name was Ernie Els, the golf player.
Ernie Els. Now this is interesting, if I can just say this, because we've recorded a guy called Michael Scully. He worked with the Bushmans. Very good episode. Still going to come out next week, I think. And he's now running hotels. And part of his company, the ambassador, is who? Ernie Els. So Ernie, if you're listening here, come and talk to us.
Definitely. So Ernie was there with us, and what I remember from Ernie was still amateur at that stage, and not even us, you know, most of us didn't even know who Ernie Els was. But every Saturday morning, Ernie had to be ready at 5:30, you know, with his golf shirt and his golf clubs, and he had to stand inspection to make sure that it was all clean and neat. And then soon afterwards, the duty driver from the base would come and pick up Ernie, and he would take him. And then Ernie was the partner to the base commander. I think at that stage it was a Colonel Stein. They used to play together, but no one knew who this young guy was. And they would apparently play against the local businessmen and farmers and so on, in all the, you know, the golf courses around Hoedspruit. And they would totally annihilate all the other teams. And you know, no one could figure out why this was, but it was Ernie Els that was so good.
Yeah, he was a fantastic golf player.
Yes,
Fantastic.
that's right.
I mean, he won quite a few major things as well. I mean, he was just fantastic.
So the one thing I remember about Ernie Els at the time is that whenever he came back on a Saturday evening from these golf tournaments in the Hoedspruit area, he would always bring us some beers, or, you know, you would often win prizes like a bottle of rum, and, you know, he would share that with all of us. So there's 60 guys, but not everyone was drinking, but he would make sure that everyone at least shared in whatever he brought back. So it was really awesome for him to do that for us. And we only later realized when, you know, after the dog handler's course, I think he was placed back to Pretoria, to one of the bases there, so that he could actually play more golf. And I think his career just took off after that. And I think the rest is history with Ernie Els. But we were very privileged to have had an opportunity to do the dog handler's course with him. I still remember when at the end of the dog handler's course, you do like a final test with a dog, where you had to do certain things to show that you could control the dog and be in charge of the dog, and, you know, work with the dog to be a security handler. And I think Ernie had one dog that wasn't that easy to work with, and this dog used to bite him all the time. So they changed his dogs to an Alsatian. And then all of a sudden, him and that new dog just clicked, and he did well. And, you know, I still can remember him doing his test at that time. But it was great fun for us to work with the dogs.
And I must ask you a question here, because I was at the police dog school as well for a time. And they had a great system. They would take the biggest dog and give it to the guy they dislike the most. And then, of course, these police dogs are not normal dogs, and they've been in those kennels for a long time since they were babies. And then they were walked through, it is not a normal dog. And then, of course, this dog would attack this guy. And then, you know, the police method was absolutely, well, we'll treat the dog first, and then we'll look after you. Was that the same type of thing when your dog is absolutely part of your life? Can you remember your dog's name?
Yes, later on when I was at Air Force Base Petersburg, my dog, and I'll actually share a picture of him. His name was Ziggy, and he was quite an old dog at that stage. He was 12 years old. And you know, something interesting about these dogs is that they were actually on the asset register of the Defence Force. They, in their right ear, they had a tattoo with a number in it. And I remember Ziggy's number was AW182. You know, after all these years, I still remember his force number. And we didn't train the dogs to be dogs. We just got dogs that were already trained in the Air Force, and you were never sure what you were going to get. But the sense I got was that the training methods were maybe a bit crude at that time, and they were breeding a very aggressive type of dog, you know, to do this job, and not really you know, having more humane ways to treat the dogs. And I remember some of the guys that had really bad ideas on how to work with dogs, and they would often, you know, cause more damage than anything else, and you know, which was unfortunate. But I suppose you had to realize that these were not pets at home; they were there to do a job, and you had to take care of that dog. You were responsible for it, and if you let it down, it was going to let you down. So how we would go about matching guys at Air Force Base Petersburg, and I'll come back to that in a moment, is that when we got a new dog handler in, we would let him spend some time with each new dog and just get to see if there's a personality match between the people and the dog. You know, it's almost like the dog chooses the handler. And that seemed to work very well, because we had one or two dogs that were very hard to deal with, you know, and I'll tell you a story about one of them a bit later. But if the handler could handle that dog, and he had a bit of a level of reality, eye-to-eye reality with that dog, they got along like a house on fire, and they were really productive as a team. But when you had a mismatch, you would have a dog that would be very hard to work with, that would try and bite the handle every now and then, and there'd just be not a great positive relationship. And then we would make changes to the teams to make sure that we got that balance right, to actually have the right dog at the right time for the right person. So, but I really enjoyed the time with the dogs. So, you know, at the end of the dog handlers course, then at this Air Force regiment, we were now placed out to the different. We were now told, oh, by the way, you're not going to the border, because the dogs are only used within South Africa's borders. They were not used on the border itself. So, you know, some guys were really disappointed, and some were very glad about not having to go to the border, you know. But anyway, what they did is they allocated you to a base based on the postal code of where you were registered originally as your home address. But I wasn't Centurion, but I was placed out, you know, the closest possible Air Force base for me was Petersburg. So there were one or two guys from Petersburg that ended up in Petersburg, but the rest of us, you know, about 80% of us were from all over Johannesburg and Pretoria addresses. So we, in, I think it was July 88, we were about 6 of us were sent to Air Force Base Petersburg. We arrived there, and you know, now you were part of, I think it was 524 Security Squadron at Air Force Base Petersburg. And Petersburg at that stage was home to 85 Combat Flying School. They had the Impalas, and that was the place where Impala pilot would do a course to, he would previously come from a squadron where he learned to fly the Impalas, but now he had to deliver weapons. He had to throw bombs and use the machine gun and, you know, missiles and things like that. And he was a basic air-to-air combat and things like that. And that, what was 85 Combat Flying School was there for. And the other flying school that was there was a 98 flying school, and combat flying school, and that was the Cheetahs. So at that stage we had Cheetah Ds there. Later the E came, and then later the C. And you know, there was one hangar with all the Cheetahs, and there was about 3 or 4 hangars of all the Impalas. And we also had the mobile radar group. They had a big trailer-based rodent radars that were usually deployed at Undangwa, at Air Force Base Petersburg. And so we had 10 dogs there. We had kennels at the end of the base, and our job basically was to, in the daytime, you would go down to the kennels, and we do a first parade on the dogs. We have a list of stuff we got to check, where you got to brush them out and check their ears and see that their health is fine. You get taught how to do all of that, and then you've got to clean the kennels. We were picking up dog poo for 18 months of our lives. We were just picking up dog poo every day, and that was just part of the game. So at night time, we had you had 2 shifts of beat. So the one was 6 to 12 at night, and the other one was then 12 to 6 in the morning. You were issued with a radio. You had your dog and an R5. And then you arrived there at 5:30, let's say in the evening, and you everyone, the guard commander checks everyone is there on time, and he issues all the weapons and so on. And then we go down to the kennels together, grab the dogs, make sure that they're all well, and then you go to your respective. We had 5 different guarding areas within the Air Force base that we had to guard. So that was in fact just the basic framework that we used. So the next thing is that over the next 6 months, there was another skill that you had to learn, and that was in Afrikaans they call it the dark procedures, the challenge procedures. If you had to run into someone on the squadron that you were guarding, what would you do? How do you handle that situation that you remain safe, you remain in charge of the situation, that you can control it and so on. So it took about 6 months of the guard commanders coming around at night to try and catch you and teach you over 6 months on how to do that procedure properly. So that if you ever get into a real situation where you had to actually challenge someone, that you could do it properly and safely and come the best out of the situation. So we went through that. That was great fun. It was now a bit different than we slept in the mornings. So we early in the morning you go to the kennels, come back and then sleep, and then in nighttime you would be awake. So our clocks were totally the wrong way around. Standing beat at night, looking after the aircraft, and it was not boring at all. So we had great fun doing this. We made our own fun there, looking after the aircraft. But there was to give an example of this challenge procedure. The one night was a Sunday night. I remember it. I was looking after 85 Combat Flying School. They had a couple of hangars. In the middle of the hangars, they had a HQ building. And as I came around the one hangar, I saw there was a vehicle parked outside this building. It was about 8 o'clock at night, this Sunday night. And I could see the boot was open, and there was 2 guys carrying stuff from the building and putting it in the back of the vehicle. And so I did the procedure. You start off by positioning yourself in a place where they wouldn't see you, and in the darkness, you shout at them, "Halt!" To get their attention, and then you tell them what to do next. And these 2 guys, "Oh no, we're fine. We're supposed to be there. We're just getting something." And I said, "No, I'm in charge now, and this is my area of responsibility, and you will now listen to what I'm going to tell you to do." And I asked them, "Who are you?" And they said they were Lieutenant so and so and Lieutenant so and so. I said, "Do you have any identification on you?" She said, "No, they didn't." So okay. So if you came through the front gate, they would have given you a password for that night. So what is the password? No, they were not given a password. I say, okay. Then you're coming with me. I'm taking you now by foot. We're going to walk back to the main gate. And these 2 guys, they were not very cooperative. And all I did is I took my dog and I put him forward and said, "Suk, suk, suk, suk." And I was, like getting these guys to realize I've got a dog with me, other than the R5 that they haven't seen yet. But I had this dog with me, and all of a sudden they were very cooperative, because they didn't know what this dog was going to do. Now, Ziggy was one of those dogs that he was not aggressive at all. He probably licked himself to death, but anyway, so I got these guys, hands in the air, walk in front of me. We walked to the nearest road, and then I walked them down the road to the front gate. And every 50 meters we would stop, and I would order them to get down and do a couple of push-ups and sit-ups, just to remind them that they need to get the password next time they come into the base. And I did that 3 or 4 times, and we finally got to the gate, and these guys were standing there. They were all tired from all the sit-ups and push-ups and so on. And I got to the gate, and the NCO on duty was standing outside, having his coffee. And I said to him, please go get the officer on duty. And the officer on duty came out. He was one of the officers on the base. And he looked at me, and I said to him, I found these 2 individuals loading assets into a vehicle at the squadron. They don't have identification on them. They don't have the password. And I'm handing them over to him now to take the matter further. And he asked them who they were, and they said no, they just arrived that weekend to do the operational conversion course at 85. There were 2 pilots from one of the Impala squadrons. And he said, do you have any identification on you? No, they don't. I said, ooh, that's going to be a problem. But eventually he sorted out, he was going along with all of this. And he realized that these 2 guys, just because they knew, they didn't know the procedures. And unfortunately, the guy who let them in forgot to, before he could give them the password, they already drove through. And so these 2 lieutenants, when this was now all done, turned around and came to me and shook my hand and said, we are so glad that the security on this base is so sharp, that it gives us great confidence in what we have to do as pilots if we got guys like you looking after us, and our planes to keep us safe. And this lieutenant, his surname was Forster. Now, unfortunately, later that year, I think late in 89, while he was in that course, he was on a training sortie near Tsanin, and he flew into a horseshoe mountain in the fog, and they actually crashed into the mountain, and he was dead. Him and the instructor were dead. And it was a small world, because I later found out that his mother was my history teacher at school, and when I was in standard 6 at school. So they later brought back the wreckage of the plane, and they put it in the base as part of the board of inquiry. And I remember there was almost nothing left over that Impala. It must have flown into that mountain at quite a high speed. It was quite sad. Anyway, so standing beat at night, was also great fun. So the one event I want to tell you about that was quite funny was what we used to do is that if you had the first beat between 6 to 12 at night, everyone would get together at a little office on the hard stand in front of 85 Combat Flying School. And on the hard stand was the piece of concrete now next to the runway where all these planes were parked. So there used to be more than 20 Impalas in front of us, about 50 meters away, just standing there at night so that we had a guard. And so 3 of us, it was Van van Niekerk and Roy Trollop and myself, we each had a dog. And we got together at this place at 10 o'clock at night, and then the guard commander would come around with coffee or hot chocolate and biscuits. And we had like a 20-minute break there, and just have our hot drink before we go now back for the last couple of hours before we had to change over guards again. But in that time, we next to the hangar at 85 Combat Flying School, they had these gutted downpipes every 6 meters. And we used to use those to take your leash of the dog, and you hook it behind the back of the downpipe, and the dog would immediately know that you're going to be there a while, and they would just fall down and sleep. It was just lie there. And the 3 of us would get together, and we would wait for the guard commander and have our coffee and our biscuits and so on, and then later he would leave. And this specific night, we were sitting there, and it was a half moon. and you could just see the planes shimmering in the moonlight on the hard stand. And all of a sudden, one of the dogs that we had, it was a huge Rottweiler by the name of Gaddafi. His name was Gaddafi. He had a big head like this. But he was probably the youngest of all of them. He was a young boy. He was 2 or 3 years old, but he was huge. He was a huge dog. And Gaddafi, all of a sudden, he sat up and he saw something across the hard stand. Now, we knew that we had to, that's why the dogs were there. They would pick up things long before we would pick it up. And Gaddafi was seeing something between 2 of the impalas move. And we looked, and in the darkness, your senses get so sharp at night from just working at night that I could see there was a rabbit between the 2 impalas. And as I said to Van and Roy next to me, I said, "There's a rabbit, between the 3rd and the 4th impala." And they also saw it. The next minute, we hear this hell of a bang behind us. And it was Gaddafi ripped the whole bottom section of that gutter pipe off completely from the hanger wall. And he was now heading straight for this rabbit between the 2 impalas. But as he was running, he now realized that there was something behind him, and he didn't know it was the gutter pipe hitting the concrete and making sparks and noises behind him. So he was running even faster, and the rabbit was running even faster, and Gaddafi just disappeared in the grass, and we didn't see him again for quite some time. So now what do you do? So Van and I went back to our respective posts, and Roy went back to the guard room to go get the guard commander again, and now they were driving up and down, the runway looking for Gaddafi. They didn't find him until the next morning. By that time, he's lost the piece of gutter pipe somewhere on the base, and his tongue was dragging, and you could see this guy was really tired. And I think by the time we put him back in his kennel, he just fell asleep. And I was just imagining what type of stories he was telling the other dogs of this metal dragon chasing him across the base. So it was great fun. But that was basically, at the end of, in April '89, I got a bit of a break from just being on the base, and I was sent back to the Air Force Regiment. A couple of guys were sent to go do the Guard Commander's course now. And that included a whole lot of other things, a lot more weapons training, which was awesome. We now added the mag, for instance, the LMG mag to our training. And I just love the mag. It was an awesome weapon. It was the closest we're going to get to an R1, in the Air Force. So we did the training there. And I remember for the shooting phase of that Guard Commander's course, the Witchblade had its own rifle range, but that was being renovated. They were redoing the stop wall where the sand had gone down too low, and you couldn't use it safely anymore, so they were fixing that up. So all of us had to go to 5 Recce in Phalaborwa and to their shooting range. And we camped out there for, initially it was planned to be 2 or 3 nights, but because it was so hot, they stopped training from 10 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock in the evening, in the late afternoon, because it was just too hot. You couldn't do anything. And then, so we would shoot early in the morning between 7 and 10. And then we would shoot again, just before sunset. We would try and get another table in or 2. And it was really tough going because some of the tables you would shoot with the R5 at 300 meters. And we had some good instructors. We really, were taught very well to shoot. But at 300 meters, when it was still hot, if you look at the target, the mirage on the shooting range would make the target fold over and it would disappear. So where do you aim? Where do you shoot? So we had to reshoot a lot of those tables, and it took quite a few goes before everyone passed the tables, just because of that. And I remember the shooting areas where we shot from at 5 Recce, these big pebbles, huge rocks. And I thought, who would put these big rocks there? It's very uncomfortable. Your elbows, who can shoot accurately if you shoot from there? But that was it, and we just had to do that. So that was great fun. So I went back to the Air Force Base at Petersburg, and for the last few months of my national service. And then something else, another very interesting occurrence happened that I think I need to mention. It was part of national service. So the one Saturday, I get a message at the bungalow where we stayed on the base that I had to urgently go to the guard room. And when I arrived there was a sergeant from the military police, from Air Force military police there, and he said, I need to come with him. So I got into his van with him, and we went to the police station there on the base. And he took me to his office, and he sat me down, and he said, you are being investigated for theft, and I'm now going to interrogate you until you come up with the truth. What happened here? You know, type of story. And I said, oh no, what is this now? So I said, may I ask, what did I steal? What are you accusing me that I steal? He says, no, you stole a G suit from 89 Combat Flying School. One of the cheetah pilots, you stole one of his G suits. I said, oh, that's interesting, because the only reason he had my name is because the previous week I was one of the 3 or 4 guys who actually guarded 89 Combat Flying School. I said, okay. And I said, oh, well, I don't know nothing about that, but, you know, go ahead, ask me any questions, and, you know, I'll see how helpful I could be. And he was trying to give you the 3rd degree in his own way, but, you know, it was not very successful. Anyway, long story short, for part of this interrogation, he left me alone in the office, and he went to get lunch, and we had lunch and came back like an hour later. And he was, you know, trying to put all sorts of pressure on me to confess that I stole this G suit. And I just said to him, sorry, the best way I can help you is just confirming that I know nothing about this. But if I hear something, I can, you know, definitely let you know. You'll be the first person to know. He didn't like this at all, but ultimately he had no case, he had no facts, no information, no leads, nothing. And he was just trying to do his job to interrogate as many as possible people to come up with the missing G suit. So what happened is that in late November, middle November, there was a Atlas flight engineer, civilian flight engineer that worked for Denel in the Joburg International Airport. Denel was on the, I think, on the eastern side of the airport there. They were servicing a lot of the planes for the Air Force, and this guy was part of the flight testing process that to sign off that the aircraft was ready to return back to the squadron. And about 2 weeks earlier, he flew with in the backseat of a Cheetah D to Petersburg to deliver the Cheetah D back to the squadron. And he took off his G suit, and he hanged it behind the door of the crew room at the squadron, where no one saw it, because if you opened the door, the G suit would close against the wall and no one would see it. And the only time it would close again is if there was no one back in the crew room. But anyway, so they completely missed his G suit. So 2 weeks after delivering the Cheetah, he was now doing a test flight at Joburg International, which later became Oliver Tambo Airport. And in that test flight, the Impala they were test flying had an engine failure, and him and the pilot ejected, but this flight engineer unfortunately died in the crash. The pilot survived, but he died. And the people now wrapping up his affairs now had to come up with the G suit that was missing. And obviously somebody must have stolen it. It can only be the security guards, so it must have been me and so on. But eventually someone found the flight suit hanging behind the door, and you know, we got a message through the channels about 2 weeks later to say that the charges have been dropped, you know, against you for stealing this flight suit. I said, who would want to steal a G suit anyway? Anyway. So that was just part of that experience of national service, that you were almost guilty until proven innocent. It's part of that. But in that time, and maybe a story for the next episode is one of my friends that did the doggy and his course with me at Housebreak had since been posted to Waterkloof, and he got involved with the guys who flew the electronic warfare missions, up in Pretoria. And he was now joining them, and he was telling me about what they were doing in their training and so on. And he got me very interested into this area of electronic warfare. And so when I finally finished my 2 years conscription, I almost immediately joined the Air Force, because this area of electronic warfare fell under, at that stage, under intelligence. I had to join Air Force intelligence, and that's where I started in January 1990 in Air Force intelligence at Air Force HQ. But I think that's a story for maybe the next episode.
I must ask you, I know you aviators, pilot, aircrew types are a bit strange. Ask me, I was, we're not going into that story. When you saw those aircraft standing there in the moonlight, did you feel something? Did you feel like, man, perhaps I can one day, become air crew? Or were you not thinking that far ahead?
Well, that's interesting. I think at some stage, there is a lure of that. So you have that gene in you to fly or not. And you look at these and say, oh, it can't be that difficult to do it. And I think initially, at school, I thought maybe I wanted to become a pilot, and maybe I would apply, but my maths was just not good enough to do that at that time. So I didn't apply. I thought, no, I would never get in as a pilot. But in all fairness, I think the great thing of the 2 years of conscription is that it gave me time to think of what I really wanted to do, because I had no idea. I had no idea what career I wanted to pursue, what area I was interested in, and I needed that experience of national service to help form up, your character and your interest and grow up a bit. And that was what was great about national service. You were exposed to so many people, and your people knowledge increases, and you yourself grow as a person at that time. And you often hear people who did their national service said it's the best 2 years of their life they never want over again. And a lot of people had a great time, and some people I get it, maybe didn't have a great time, but it was really character building and personality building. And after that, I got a bit of a sense of who I was and what I wanted to do next. And I think that's where that led me to my Air Force career and what followed next.
Now I have to ask you, Jacques, probably the most important questions of this entire episode. I was told that the woman looks at the Air Force guy in his step-outs a bit differently than what they look at the Army guy, or even the police who were really not that neat, or perhaps even the Navy guys. Will you agree with that, or was it not like that at all? Is it just a rumor?
Well, I think there must be some truth in that, because there's a bit of an attitude that comes with a uniform. But I think that, I have to admit it now, but I wouldn't admit it then. But the guys who got the most attention from the women at that, while I was in the Air Force, are the Navy guys with their white uniform, because they looked like Tom Cruise and Top Gun. They were really smart. That white uniform was really awesome. I think that they would be, like top of the pecking order when it came to, really attractive guys, in that uniform. It was that uniform could hide a lot, but the Air Force guys were not too far behind that, but there was definitely, women who would admit that a guy in uniform, it doesn't matter what uniform, is really attractive to them. So, but I would think the Navy guys had the game, they were a bit of ahead of the game than the rest of us.
Well, I suppose I have to agree with it. Jacques, this was very good. And I must tell you, I'm impressed with the Air Force. I've always been impressed with the Air Force. I mean, even the uniforms, the aircraft, there's just something magic about these people. I'm really grateful that you were first. I hope you're not the last. If there's any Air Force person listening here, please come and talk to us. We need to know these stories. As I just said to Jacques, I probably cut it out, but I can tell you, this is the type of stories which cannot go into memory lane and nobody knows about it. These are the type of things which needs to come out. So I thank you for being here. I know there's going to be a lot more episodes. Can you tell us the next one, next week? What are you going to tell us? What are you going to talk about?
So what I've got lined up now as the next phase of my career is we are joining permanent force in Air Force Intelligence. And then I get to do my electronic warfare training. And a lot of people did not know what we actually did in that area. It may be not that predictable what we did. And I think you found the stories very interesting. And also then go to the second half of my career, where I was sent overseas to go do some international intelligence training. And I'll share some of that with you. And then finally, how I ended up working on the downstream side of South Africa's space program and what we did there. So I'm sure it's going to be very interesting for a lot of your listeners.
I have no damn doubt about that. And I feel sorry for all of you who have to now wait 1 week. But I don't have to wait 1 week. I will know long before you look. So anyway, I want to say to everybody once again, as I always say, you're welcome here. Just write me a letter. It's not a big deal. You know, I think even Jacques can tell you that. Anybody can tell you that. Just write me a letter. Say to me, you've got a story you want to share with us. And I'll take it from there. And you are not unimportant. Trust me. Everybody of you has got a story we want to know. So until we meet again, God bless.